The first time you didn't text back immediately. He sent 3 more messages in 4 minutes, not to ask if you were okay, to ask where you were. You remember staring at the screen and feeling something you hadn't felt in a very long time. Quiet. Not peace, not yet, just the strange quiet that comes when you stop chasing a voice you thought you couldn't live without. You didn't know it then, but that was the moment the relationship changed. Because from that day on, his behavior changed too. Not all at once, just enough to make you believe things were finally getting better. You mistook those changes for love. These are 7 things that happen when he realizes you are no longer the same person he once controlled. Every one of them can feel like hope. And that's exactly what makes them so difficult to recognize. This is not about someone who stopped loving you. That would be simpler. It would have a beginning. It would have an end. This is about what happens when someone who depended on your compliance begins to realize they may no longer have it. The hardest part is this. The behaviors that follow rarely look controlling. They look like effort. They look like insight. They look like change. They look like the person you had been hoping for all along. Therapists who work with people leaving these kinds of relationships tend to describe a similar moment. Just as one person begins to reclaim something of herself, the other begins to change his behavior. And if you don't know what you're looking at, it can look exactly like love. And the first one is the one that always works. When someone with strong narcissistic traits begins to realize they're losing control of a relationship, many people describe a noticeable shift in behavior. Therapists who work with people leaving these kinds of relationships often hear a similar story. The moment one person begins to withdraw, emotionally, physically, or simply by responding differently, the dynamic changes. Because what happens next rarely looks like manipulation. It can look like vulnerability. It can look like remorse. It can look like the breakthrough you had been hoping for. Looking back, many people realize it wasn't that the behavior became healthier, it became harder to say no to. 7 things people often notice when someone realizes they may be losing you. 1. He becomes the person you always wanted. 2. The apology finally comes. 3. Suddenly everyone else gets involved. 4. Your leaving becomes the tragedy. 5. Silence. 6. Someone new. 7. He comes back. The words sound different. The pattern doesn't. To understand why these behaviors happen, it helps to understand what some people may be getting from the relationship. Not only love, not only connection, something deeper than that. Stability. For some people, a relationship is not only a place to love and be loved, it can also become a place to feel significant, to feel secure, to feel in control, to feel like the most important person in someone else's world. And when that source of reassurance begins to change, when you stop responding in the ways you used to, the reaction that follows may not always look like grief. It can feel to some people like the floor disappearing. This is why the behaviors that follow can be so confusing. They often do not look like attempts to restore influence. They look like love. They look like change. They look like hope. Looking back, many people describe the same realization. He was not always fighting for the relationship itself. He was fighting for what the relationship provided. And that distinction matters. Because when someone is trying to recover a feeling, reassurance, importance, certainty, the method can change. Vulnerability, if it works. Apology, if it works. Distance, if it works. Anger, if it works. The behavior changes. The need underneath it may not. The first thing he does is the most disorienting. He becomes, suddenly, the person you spent years asking him to be. He listens differently. He asks how you are and waits for the answer. He remembers things. He notices when something is wrong before you have to say it. And for a moment, sometimes for several moments, spread across several weeks, you think, this is what I always wanted. Maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe this is who he really is. What therapists who work with people in this situation tend to observe is this. The behavior is often genuine in the moment. He is not necessarily performing, he is responding. But responding to what? Not to you, to the threat of losing you. The attention looks identical. The source is completely different. One will last. The other will last exactly as long as the threat does. The second thing he does is apologize. And this is the one that is hardest to argue with, because the apology sounds right. It uses the right words. It arrives with the right tone. It comes at the right moment when you are closest to leaving and furthest from believing things could change. There is a distinction most people only notice later. The apology for what he did sounds like this. I was wrong to do that. I understand why it hurt you. I take responsibility for it. The apology for how you felt sounds like this. I'm sorry you felt that way. I never meant to make you feel like that. I hate that I hurt you. The second version is not an apology for behavior. It is an apology for your reaction to behavior. It sounds almost identical. It changes nothing. Because if he does not own what he did, only how it landed, then what exactly has changed? The words. And the words on their own are not accountability. They are the appearance of it. The third thing is quieter. You notice it first in small things. A message from his mother asking how you are doing. A mutual friend mentioning casually that he seems really different lately. Someone who knows you both saying he has been asking about you. None of these feel coordinated. That is the point. What tends to happen in this phase is that the network around the relationship becomes an extension of the relationship, not through anything that could be named, through presence. He stays visible to the people around you. He remains likable. He says the right things to the right people at the right time. And those people, without knowing they are doing it, carry his case for him. They are not lying. They genuinely believe what they are telling you. That is what makes this the most difficult of the 7 to name, because the people delivering the message have no idea they are delivering a message. He does not need to be in the room. He just needs people in the room who are still on his side. The fourth thing happens in the language he uses. At some point, the conversation shifts. It is no longer about what he did. It is about what you are doing. You are abandoning him. You are giving up on something real. You are letting other people influence your decisions. You are not seeing clearly. You are throwing away years. And somewhere in there, delivered carefully at the right moment, comes the line that is hardest to unhear. I never thought you were capable of hurting me like this. He is no longer the person who caused the problem. He is the person suffering the consequences of your response to it. And if you grew up believing that causing someone pain made you responsible for fixing it, this works. It works very well. Because now the question is no longer, what did he do? The question becomes, what kind of person are you if you leave someone who is this devastated by losing you? The tragedy is real. His pain may be real, but the story he is telling about who caused it is not. The fifth thing is silence. Not the silence of someone who has accepted the ending, the silence of someone who is waiting to see what you do with it. He stops reaching out. The messages slow, then stop. The calls do not come. The mutual friends stop mentioning him. And at first, it feels like relief. Then it feels like something else. What tends to happen in this phase is that the silence creates a pull. Many people describe this part with a kind of embarrassment when they look back. You start to wonder if he is okay. You check his social media. You ask someone who knows him how he is doing. Maybe you send a message, something casual, just to see. And if you do, he is there, immediately, as if he had been waiting precisely for that. Because he had. The silence was not withdrawal, it was a question. And the moment you reached out, you answered it. You told him the door was not fully closed, and that was all he needed to know. The sixth thing is the one that hurts in a way you didn't expect. He finds someone new. Quickly. Publicly. In a way that is visible to everyone who knows you both. And the part that is hardest to explain, the part that catches people off guard, is not the jealousy. It is the doubt. Because if he moved on that fast, was any of it real? If someone else already has what you spent years trying to earn, what does that say about you? What does it say about him? What tends to get overlooked in this moment is that the speed itself is telling, not about you, about what he was actually looking for. A person who genuinely loved you grieves. They do not replace. They do not post. They do not make sure the right people see exactly how well they are doing. It arrived at a speed that tells you something about what the previous one was providing. He didn't move on from you. He moved on to the next person who would give him what you stopped giving. And the fact that it happened so quickly, that is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of what he was actually after. The seventh thing is the one that surprises people most. He comes back. Not always immediately, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months, sometimes long enough that you had almost stopped expecting it. But he comes back. And when he does, the conversation sounds different. He has had time to think. He understands things now that he didn't before. He can see his part in it. He knows what he did wrong. He knows what he would do differently. The words are more precise. The acknowledgement is more specific. The version of him standing in front of you is more convincing than any version you have seen before. Not crueler, more convincing. What tends to happen is that this version is harder to say no to than any of the others, because he has learned. Not how to be different, how to be more persuasive. The script is the same. He has simply had time to rehearse it better. And if you go back, you will eventually reach the moment where you realize the rehearsal was the only thing that changed. Not the play, the performance. One thing this does not tell you: not everyone who does these things is doing them deliberately. Not every incomplete apology is manipulation. Not every return is an attempt to regain control. Human behavior is complicated. Some people repeat unhealthy patterns without fully understanding them. Others are acting from fear, insecurity, or emotional pain. This is not a diagnostic tool. It is not a checklist, and it is not a way to reduce a person to a label. It is a description of a pattern that many people only recognize after they have stepped outside it. If any of this feels familiar, the most useful question is probably not, does he fit a category? It is, who have I become inside this relationship? Am I becoming more myself or less? And has the answer become clearer or harder to recognize over time? Not because he is unusually clever, not because you are unusually vulnerable, because many of us grow up with stories about love that make these moments much harder to recognize. We hear that love is hard, that the people worth keeping are worth fighting for, that if someone comes back with tears, with promises, with effort, it must mean something. It must mean they care. It must mean the relationship deserves one more chance. What those stories often leave out is that similar behaviors can come from very different places. Someone may come back because they have genuinely changed. Someone else may come back because losing the relationship feels unbearable to them. From the outside, those two moments can look remarkably similar, which is why the behavior alone is not always enough. The more useful question is, what has actually changed? Not just the words, not just the tears, not just the effort. Has the pattern shifted, or has it simply become harder to see? Perhaps the most confusing moment in these relationships is not always when someone is at their worst. It can be when they seem to become exactly what you needed. Because that is the moment when hope and discernment become hardest to tell apart. 7 things people often notice when someone realizes they may be losing you. All of them designed to feel like the relationship finally working. Suddenly, they become the person you had been asking for. The apology finally arrives, but somehow nothing really changes. Other people become part of the conversation. Your decision to leave becomes the tragedy. Silence appears, waiting to see whether you will break it. Someone new appears surprisingly quickly. And then they come back. The words may sound different, the pattern feels familiar. None of these behaviors on their own prove anything. Relationships are complicated. People are complicated. But sometimes, when several of these changes appear together, they describe a pattern that is much easier to recognize in hindsight than while you were living it. You do not need to remember a diagnosis. You do not need to remember a label. Just remember this: if the relationship suddenly becomes everything you always hoped it would be, ask yourself what has actually changed. Because the most convincing change is not always the deepest one. This week, if you are willing, think back to the last time the relationship felt like it was improving. A moment when he seemed different, more present, more accountable, more like the person you had been hoping for. And ask yourself one question: what actually changed? Not just what he said, not just how hopeful you felt in that moment. What was different afterwards? Did the change continue when the pressure disappeared? Did the new behavior become part of the relationship? Or did everything slowly return to what it had been before? You do not need to answer out loud. You do not need to make a decision today. Just notice the pattern. Because the question is not simply whether someone is capable of change. Most people are. The question is, are you seeing real change, or are you seeing a moment that disappears when things feel safe again? Only you can answer that. But the answer often becomes clearer when you stop looking at the promise and start looking at the pattern. Which of the 7 felt most familiar? Not the most dramatic one. The one you recognized before you even finished hearing it. The one that brought back a specific moment, a conversation, a silence, a promise, a time they came back, and you almost believed things would finally be different. You do not have to share more than you want to, but sometimes putting a pattern into words is the first time it stops feeling like something only you experienced. If you feel comfortable, share the one you recognized. Next. You saw what happened when she stopped chasing. Now see what happens when he notices. 3 messages, no reply, 4 minutes. The next thing he does changes everything. The pattern was always there. Now you know what it looks like when it starts to lose its hold.